Silver on the Tree by Susan Cooper, Part 4 of the Midsummer Tree, Chapter 19, The Rising. The Black Rider said, "We challenge the boy, Bran of Clwyd, of the Dyffryn Valley, in the kingdom of Gwynedd, called Bran Davies for his father in the world of his growing, called Pendragon for his father, the Pendragon in the world from which he came. We challenge his place in this business. He has not the right." "He has the right of birth," Will said sharply. "And there lies the challenge, old one. You shall hear." The Black Rider could not now be seen. His voice came hollowly out of the cloak, or out of the dark turmoil beyond the mist. Will had the sudden sense of an endless army of unseen forces behind him. Out there in the dark, he looked quickly away. The lady's clear voice said overhead, "Whom do you seek to judge the challenge, Lord of the Dark? For you have the right to choose, as the light has the right to approve or deny your choice." There was a deliberate pause. All at once the rider was visible again, a distinct figure, his hooded head turned toward Merriman. "We choose the man, John Rowlands," he said. Merriman glanced down at Will. He said nothing either aloud or in the silent speech of the old ones, but Will could feel his indecision. He was filled with the same vague suspicion himself. What are they up to? But it fell back like a wave that breaks over a rock when he thought of John Rowlands and their long reasons for trusting his judgment. Merriman nodded. He lifted his wild-haired white head. "That is agreed." John Rowlands was paying them no attention. He stood in the middle of the boat with Jane, Barney, and Simon grouped beside him on a thwart, as if they were close for comfort, though for whose comfort Will would not have cared to tell. Rowlands was gazing at Bran, his lean-lined brown face tight with anxiety. His dark eyes flickered on the tranquil, gleaming form of the lady, and then back to the bright mist enclosing Bran. "Bran Buck," he said unhappily, "are you all right?" But there was no answer, and instead the lady turned her grave face to Rowlands, and he was suddenly very still, looking up at her, a silent, awkward figure with the dark, formal suit sitting on his lithe frame as if it belonged to someone else. "John Rowlands," the cool, musical voice said, "there will be things said to you now by the Lords of the Dark and the Light, and you must listen to each with good attention, and weigh in your own mind the merit of what is said by each, and then you must say which you think is in the right, without fear or favour, and the power of the high magic which is present in this place, as it is everywhere in the universe, will put its seal on your decision." John Rowlands stood there, still looking at her. He seemed caught in awe, but there were spots of colour in his high cheekbones, and the finely modelled mouth was set in a straight line. Very quietly he said, "Must?" Will flinched and carefully did not look at the lady. He heard Merriman hiss softly between his teeth, but the lady's voice grew quieter, more gentle. "No, my friend. This matter holds no compulsion. We ask a favour of you, to make such a judgment, for in this world of men it is the fate of men which is at stake in the long run, and no one but a man should have the judging of it. Have you not said elsewhere as much yourself, to the old ones here and elsewhere?" John Rowlands turned and looked at Will without expression. Then he said slowly, "Very well." Suddenly Will was conscious of a crowding of the old ones, an immense array of shadowy presences all around him and behind him on the still, misted river, hovering in the unseen vessels, like their own, that he had glimpsed just as they had travelled across the miles and years of the island of Britain in the vehicle that had taken the appearance of a train. It was as if he heard the murmuring of a great crowd, as he had heard the whole circle of the old ones gathered twice before in the course of his life. Yet there was no sound he knew but the whispering of the wind in the trees that edged the river, holding in his mind the sense of their attendance and his awareness of Merriman's tall blue-robed form at his side. He looked hard and openly at the whirling black mist of the dark as he had not dared look before. The voice of the rider came strong and confident out of it. "Judge, then. You know that the boy Bran was born in a time long past, and brought into the future to grow there. His mother brought him, because she had once in her own time greatly deceived her lord and husband Arthur, and although the boy was his true son, she feared that he would not believe that was so. John Rowlands said emptily, Men may be deceived indeed. But men forgive, the writer said swiftly, smoothly, and the boy's father would have forgiven and believed Guinevere if he had had the chance. But a lord of light took Guinevere through time at her asking, and so there was no choice, and the boy was taken away. Merriman said, soft and deep, At her asking. But, the writer said, and mark this, John Rowlands, but not to a time of her asking. Will felt a coldness creeping into his mind, a dreadful misgiving, like a tiny crack that grows in a great secure dike holding back the sea. Merriman's robe rustled beside him. The writer's voice was quiet and confident. She came to the mountains of Gwynedd with her child, without thought of the time to which she came, and a man of the 20th century called Owen Davies fell in love with her and took her and reared her child as his own when she vanished away again. But that century was not of her choosing. She went where the Lord of Light took her. She did not care, but the Light had great care. Suddenly his voice rose and became harsh and accusing. The Light chose and made sure that Bran ap Arthur, Bran Pendragon, came to this time to grow into the right place at the right moment for the working of the quest of the light. Thus all the old prophecies have been fulfilled only by their manipulation of time. And that is a twisting of the terms of the high magic. And so we claim that the boy Bran, who is here only for the craft of the light, should go back to the time in which he belongs. John Rowlands said thoughtfully, Sent him back more than 1,000 years. But what language were men speaking here then? Latin, Will said. He has very little Latin, John Rowlands said, looking out at the dark mist beyond the river. You are frivolous, the voice out of the darkness said curtly. He may be taken out of time merely as he is now, so long as he plays no part in this present matter. Not frivolous, John Rowlands said, softly still. I am simply wondering how a boy can be said to belong to a time whose language he does not even speak. Just wondering, sir, in order to judge. Merriman said, without moving from his place at the stern of the boat. Belonging. That is the answer to this challenge. Whether it was the boy's mother or the light who chose the time into which he came to grow up, or whether the choice was random, nevertheless he has attached himself to that time. He has bound himself by love to those with whom he has lived there, most particularly Owen Davies, his adopted father, and Davies' friend, John Rowlands. Yes, John Rowlands said, looking up in the same swift anxiety as before to the strange cage of misty light in which dimly they could see Bran held motionless. Such loving bonds, Merriman said, are outside the control even of the high magic, for they are the strongest thing on all this earth. But then, out of the darkness beside them, over the still water from no direction that they could tell, a frightened voice cried urgently, John! John! John Rowlands' head jerked upright, weary and yet longing. That's Mrs. Rowlands, Jane whispered. Where is she? Barney swung all round, for the voice had seemed to come out of the air. There, Simon was pointing, his voice trailed away. There. They could see only her face, dimly lighted in the churning darkness beside the boat, and her hands outstretched. She was gazing imploringly at John Rowlands, and her voice was the soft, warm voice they had known from the beginning, and it was full of fear. John, help me. I have no hand in these things. I am possessed. There is a mind of the dark that comes into my own, and then I say things, and I do things, and I do not know what they are. John, we too have loving bonds of our own. Shonibok, you must help. They say they will let me go free if you will help them. Help them? John Rowland seemed to speak with difficulty. His voice sounded slow and rusty. Set right the balance, the Black Rider said curtly. Give us the proper decision. And the light is not entitled to the help of the boy Bran, and we will leave the mind of your wife, Bloodwind Rowland, and give her back to you. Oh, please, John. Mrs. Rowlands reached out her arms to him, and the appeal in her voice was so poignant that Jane, listening, could hardly bear to keep still. The things she had learned about Bloodwind Rowlands vanished totally from her mind. She could hear only the unhappiness and yearning of one human being cut off from another. Possession. There was the same odd creaking quality in John Rowland's voice, as if he were forcing the words out. It is like the possession by demons, you mean, that they used to speak of in the old days. The Black Rider gave a low, bubbling laugh, a cold sound. Bloodwind Rowland said eagerly, Yes, it is the same. It is the dark taking over my mind and making me into something else while it is there. Oh, John, Cariad, say what they want so that we can go home to the cottage and be as happy again as we have been all these years. This is all a terrible dream. I want to go home. John Rowland's fists clenched tight. As the plaintive musical voice rose in appeal, he gazed at his wife's face long and closely. Turning uncertain, he stared up at Merriman and Will, and last of all at the high remote form of the lady, but each one of them looked back at him expressionless, without any sign of threat or appeal or advice. John Rowlands looked again at Bloodwind, and suddenly Jane felt a hollow feeling of shock at the pit of her stomach, for the look that she saw in his face now was like a sad farewell for something that was forever gone. His voice was low and gentle, and they could barely hear it over the soft whimpering of the breeze on the river bank. I do not believe any power can possess the mind of a man or woman, Blood, or whatever your name should really be. I believe in God-given free will, you see. I think nothing is forced on us except by other people, like ourselves. I think our choices are our own, and you are not possessed. Therefore, you must be allied with the dark, because you have chosen to be. Terrible though it is for me to believe after all these long years. Either that, or you are not human, wholly a creature of the dark, a different creature whom I have never really known. The soft, deep voice hung over the misty river, and for a moment there was no sound or movement anywhere from the indistinct flotilla of the light, or the teeming black emptiness of the dark. Bloodwind Rowland's glimmering face was there still, and the towering figure of the rider. John Rowland's deep whisper went on, as if he were speaking his thoughts to himself. And as to Bran, that is a matter of a boy whose choice at first was not his own, but who has lived his own life since then, which is all that you can say of most of us in the end. He has indeed made loving bonds with himself, with his father, adopted father, if you like, and with me, and with others who have watched him grow up on Cleared Farm. Though not with my wife, as I had thought. His voice husked to nothing, and he swallowed and was silent for a moment. Jane was watching Bloodwind Rowlands' face. She saw it begin gradually to harden. The longing dropped away like a mask, leaving indifference and cold rage. If I am to judge, John Rowland said, then I judge that Bran Davies belongs in the time in which both he and I live our lives, and that since he is not separate, as I am, but has thrown in his lot with the light and risked much for them, then there is no reason why he should not be free to help their cause as others. They are free to help the dark if they choose. And we will pause there.